Richard, I am excited to have you on here because of your history, your devotion to purpose. And I really want to just hit it on the head to begin with purpose. My gosh, is there a more overused term and topic in personal development, business development, other than leader probably, and the amount of books with titles on purpose and leader. I mean, there's so many, and yet this has been really your life's work. And so when we look at purpose, it's not a deficit of the concept being out there, but we're obviously still missing it because we're so lacking in it. Where is the cutoff? Where is the Achilles heel of purpose, where again, it's so publicized, but we're still not getting the essence?
Yeah. Well, it's age agnostic, meaning that purpose is in younger people, midlife, and older people. And, I did a PBS special, Kevin, a few years ago, and it was shown in 400 cities across the country. And part of what I got to do as part of that was to go out to different cities in addition to what was on TV, and whole families would show up. The grandparents, the parents, the kids, all looking at wanting to do something that they knew was fundamental to their fulfillment. And I know you're all about fulfillment, and
Yep.
Purpose is fundamental to fulfillment. It's fundamental to health, to healing, happiness, to fulfillment, as we said, and ultimately even to longevity. And so it's not the key thing to start with here, I think, is it's age agnostic, and it's not a luxury. It's actually fundamental.
Okay, I want to hit then on age right there, because we have a wide age group that's going to be listening to this right now. And as we look at, even as I read some of your material and you gave some content to, as we look at real purpose, to really find our purpose takes some longevity. It takes some experience. It takes a little bit of history in our lives to really come to it. So to take that, because I've been broaching this, I've always been broaching the subject, but it's come to a head some with some of my adult kids who are in their early 20s. And honestly, Richard, I haven't felt completely competent. I mean, they feel, because of me, and I'm grateful, I guess, they feel a little burdened to what really has meaning for me. And to some degree, I'm also saying, man, I don't know. And I don't know that you can figure that out without some experience. Grapple with that with me a little bit, or reconcile that for the younger crew.
Well, another word for purpose, Kevin, is calling.
Yeah.
That's kind of the vocational word.
Yeah.
There's a job for your 20-year-old, there's a career, there's a calling, and there's a distinction there. And calling has a formula. It's G plus P plus V equals C. Gifts plus passions plus values equals calling. So a life skill of the 21st century for your 20-somethings is going to have to be to relook at their either job, career, or hopefully calling throughout their life. It's going to, they have to look at it multiple times. So do they know their gifts? Do they know their passions or their things they care about? Do they know their values, the places that they might want to do what they do well or love to do? And that's a fundamental life skill of the 21st century. So that's why the millennials pick up the purpose thing, because they saw their parents, they saw what their parents went through. But more than that right now, what I'm seeing, and I'm sure you're seeing it in similar ways, I would guess, or I don't know if we're post-pandemic, but the pandemic has really opened up the lens for people to step back and say, do I really want to live here? Do I really want to do this? Do I really want to continue? Life could be short, and it is short actually, but it could be shorter than. And so how do I go about finding what my colleague at PBS, Chris Farrell, calls purpose and a paycheck? Because they need to make a living,
right?
And they also need to make a living doing something that fits who they are. Otherwise, they're not going to be fulfilled.
Well, then play with, as we talk about right now, you mentioned jobs and careers, and we know that we're in a it seems like a unique time of the average person is going to have so many jobs and even multiple careers as opposed to a generation or two ago. And
Right.
yet with purpose, so along with that, how do you see it generally evolve? And again, I'm going to speak to the younger crew initially right here to say that your jobs in your careers may and will likely change should your tentacles of purpose be somewhat static within those.
Well, sometimes we're pushed by pain and we have to find out what's next in our careers or
Yeah.
our work. And sometimes we're pulled by possibilities in terms of what could I really be doing that would be fulfilling. So, everybody's an experiment of one. We can't generalize it to
Right.
everybody, but we can generalize to say that, or I can generalize to say that you're born with gifts. You have certain things that your hand turns to naturally. And I can talk about and define those here. And then if you get up in the morning, because purpose is the answer to the question why. What's the point of the exercise? Why am I doing this? What at the end of my life will have a fulfilling life have looked like? And that's a day-to-day choice. And so if you use your most enjoyed gifts on something you feel purposeful or passionate about in, this is a biggie, Kevin, in an environment that fits who you are. That's the
Right.
number one knockout factor in almost all career research. And that people have a job they like or something, but where they're doing it is not a good fit. There's some sort of toxic environment or toxic people or
Yes.
whatever
Thank you.
reason it is. And so figuring that out takes trial and error. I had many years ago when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I was one of the top HR people called personnel at the time in what is now US Bank. It used to be called First Bank. But I didn't know what it was called at the time, but it's now called a side hustle.
Yeah.
I had a side hustle, and my side hustle was called Lunch Hour Limited.
All right.
You buy me lunch,
Yeah.
and I'll coach you. Well, I had an 80% success ratio. 80% of the people I coached quit.
Ah,
They didn't really quit though. My CEO boss didn't think this was a good idea, and I eventually left. But what they did is they went back and had a conversation with their supervisor or their boss, or they found another place in the organization. But they said, where's the guidance counselor when I need one? I didn't need one when I was 15. Well, I might have, but I need one now to help me figure out what the best fit is for me and how to go about finding that best fit. So that's what I mean about the life skills. So that Lunch Hour Limited led to me doing what I love to do.
I want to dig into gifts then,
Yeah.
Richard, because that one is one, again, it's bandied around so often. We talk about gifts, skills, talents, whatnot. And I think even with we were having that discussion the other night with my kids, and that there are some that they each have areas of, call it gifts, call it talent. But I want to talk about it in relation to something that you're good at, because I
Yeah.
think we have a school system that will often look at something the kid is good at and say, okay, he's good at math, let's take him down that road. And yet I see sometimes that just because they're good at it, I don't see it as, maybe I'll ask you to define that a bit, because I don't see
Yeah.
it as I define a gift, or it may be something that they're good at. Doesn't mean that they enjoy it, that they
Yeah.
like it, and that they
Right.
should pursue that. I was really great at ball sports. I mean, I was just, call it a natural
Yeah.
talent. That's what everybody said. I went into it. I excelled dramatically. I did not like it. And I went
Yeah.
into an autonomous sport. I went into cycling and into running, but I was good at it. And that's where everybody's
How did you
tendency
figure
to,
out? How did you figure out then that you were good at it, but you didn't love it? What was the breakthrough there?
honestly, it was high school football. And I realized
Yeah.
I don't like the locker room. I had problems. I
Yeah.
had authority problems. So I had problems with some of the coaching and how that went on. And I
Yeah.
just got frustrated that I didn't, gosh, honestly, back then it was probably a lack of control. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's when it
Well, a
was.
couple of things. First of all, remember the book, What Color Is Your Parachute?
Yes.
Well, I met Dick Bowles before the book came out when he was looking
Oh,
for a publisher. He
oh,
couldn't
wow.
find a publisher. It went on to
Wow.
be the best selling all time career book in history,
Yeah.
10 million plus copies still out. selling. He died about 3, 4 years ago, but we were good friends and colleagues. He wrote the foreword to one of my books called Something to Live For. I've written 11 books all about purpose in one fashion or another. His foreword was The Gifts We Love. And he was I'm going to give a definition of gifts, so I'm
Okay.
getting there quickly. But he said this. He said, I'm an Episcopal priest. He was. And he said, I had this dream that I had a conversation with God, and I wanted to go to earth and be born. And God, being a loving God, God said to me, yeah, you'll need something to do there. I'm going to give you some gifts, some things to take with you to do while you're there. So you can see this. I can go further, but he woke up and he had amnesia. He couldn't remember the gifts that God gave him. And he said, Kevin, he said, we all have amnesia. We've all been born with gifts, but we can't remember what they are. Therefore, we have to figure it out. And there's no manual for that. We have to figure it out sometimes with mentors or fortuitous encounters with others, or by experimenting or trying something. And so many people hoping this isn't with your kids, but their career chose them. They didn't choose it. They
Right.
chose it because their dad, Kevin, said, hey, you'd be really good. You should try this,
Right.
or a teacher or somebody along the way. And then they wake up someday and say, I never wanted to be an attorney. I'm an artist. When do I get to do that? During my short lifetime. So gifts have there's a lot of tools out there. I created one called Calling Cards, which sells all over the world. But gifts have 4 characteristics. Number one, it is something you love to do. Your hand kind of turns to it naturally. It's not something like Dick Bowles said, why would a loving God give you something you dislike or doesn't really fit? So it's something you love to do. Second, others observe you loving to do it and doing it effortlessly. It's not something that you necessarily have a degree in or had to have certificate. You've just always done that. And when I'm in an audience live and I say, raise your, how many of you have brothers and sisters? And most people, or 3/4 of their hand goes up. And I said, are your brothers and sisters' gifts the same as yours? And there's this laughter in the room. They said, no, not even close. And I said, well, when did you start to notice that? Oh, real early. I noticed, one was selling lemonade, one was fixing lawnmowers, and one was out batting balls and, whatever. So a gift is something you love to do. Second, others observe you doing it effortlessly and perhaps not necessarily superbly. Third is, this is the biggie. You can't remember learning it. I don't know. It's always been there. So when I developed calling cards, I went back and interviewed parents, siblings, teachers, and said, what was Kevin like when he was young? And they would give me these characteristics. And invariably, it would be the gifts that we're talking about here in one way or another. And then, so the first thing is love doing it, enjoy it. Second thing, others. Third, can't remember learning it. Fourth is love learning more about it and practicing it. It's not something that you have to be paid to do or forced to do. It's something that you just do. And so when you think of your gift, maybe you're doing it right now in this interview, really digging into life with people. But I know that I'm considered a pioneer in the coaching movement. And when I'm really on, I love listening deeply and asking questions. And I've always been that way my whole life. My brother, totally different. Orthopedic surgeon, likes hands-on doing, no bedside. Well, I shouldn't say that, but bedside manner is not his forte. It's really doing. And so for me, deep listening is something that I could be more specific about it, but it's been with me for forever. And I love doing it to this day. I'd love sitting here and going on and on with you about your life and your story like you're doing with me. And that's something. And so what about you? I mean, can you think of, given those characteristics, can you think of a gift of your own?
Yeah, it was probably around taking, and what I still enjoy doing today, taking an idea or an opportunity and bringing it into being, bringing it into life. I love a blank sheet of paper, and I have my wife, my my closest friend outside of her both don't like that specifically. They don't like that. They like something to work with, and
Yeah,
then taking it further, which I don't. I like creating a framework, like
yeah, yeah,
blank paper framework. I'm
yeah,
done. I
yeah,
can unfortunately maybe just jump to the next thing at that point. So I've always enjoyed
yeah,
going after things. I think you get things like, being an entrepreneur and risk and stuff, but I just
yeah,
enjoy bringing an idea
yeah,
concept to life.
yeah. And so if you look at that, and then you look at the next part of the equation, passion, or and that is, what are you really curious about? Obviously, you're really curious about people's motives,
Yeah.
right? I'm curious about different aspects of purpose, particularly as it has to do with not older, but aging and older adults, and lifelong journey. And I was backstage a while back with Richard Saul Warman, who's the founder of TED,
Yep.
TED, TED. Chris Anderson has it now, but he said, "What are you going to talk about, Richard?" And I said, "Purpose." And he kind of went, he's older, he's in his 80s. And he said, "Well, what are you talking about, young man?" Me in my 70s. And I said, "Well, I'm going to talk about purpose." And he was going to talk about curiosity.
Okay.
And he said, "Don't you think that curiosity really informs purpose?" I said, "Absolutely. If you're not curious about yourself, the world, others, you're not going to be. So what is it you're curious enough about that you want to get up in the morning and use your gifts in the service of?" So that's the starting point there. You can't always do that, maybe, but the starting point is being aware.
Well, let me ask you about the age thing. Cause I mean, again, I've got your book that for those watching the video, here it is. This is your most recent book.
Yeah,
Who do you want to be when you grow old? Now I saw that and I had immediate interest in it, not because I just turned 50 so much, but it really went into your aspect or your statement of you're going to either get old or grow old. And
all right.
I love that because I think I fear and
Yeah,
choke on, just the passing of time. And Robin Sharma, I had him on the show and he said, don't live the same life, same year over and over for 75 years and call it a life. And
yeah,
that hits
right.
me. Now your interest in you called it the second half of life, the older half. We have the younger half of
The
life.
older half. Yeah,
Yeah. And the older half. And as you said, we have a younger half focused culture. Now, I'm interested in the older half, but I got to admit, I'm a little jaded towards it or towards the focus because it feels like, well, let me take it to health. And we have so many people who reach 50, 60, 70, whatever. And then the habits of life have caught up and they now enter into ill health, chronic illness, disease, whatever.
right,
And to
right.
try to reverse it at that point is really frustrating. And I struggle with that and find myself wanting to go back earlier and say, hey, what can we do to prevent this from
Yeah,
manifesting?
right.
So with purpose, I do have that initial interest as we look at that younger half of saying, what can you do so that in
Yeah,
your latter half of, or your next half of life, you're not now going, oh crap, the career's
yeah,
over, the kids are gone, like you said,
right.
what the heck am I going to do besides just deteriorate in retirement?
Yeah. Well, I would say this about that. I have the same interest in and that's why I said it's age agnostic. And a lot of
Yeah,
younger people reading this book saying, "Why would I wait till I'm 60 or
absolutely.
later or
Yeah.
50?" And back in the 60s, uh, I was everybody listening has had fortuitous encounters, including you, with others that like Zig Ziglar's or others that have
Right.
changed their. And mine was in 1968. I spent a week with Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning,
Oh my gosh. Yes.
was in 3 concentration camps, was liberated. His whole family was killed. He weighed 87 pounds. He was a neurologist, psychiatrist, went back to Vienna, healed, and wrote Man's Search for Meaning in 9 days, which has completely changed lives
Yeah.
worldwide, including. So I was getting out of counseling psychology graduate school, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. And I saw that Frankl was actually doing a seminar in San Diego. And I went down there and it was life changing. And he said this:
Yeah.
he said it in Man's Search for Meaning, but that, is kind of his opening salvo. His point of view is this: the last of the human freedoms is choice. It's to choose what you want the next moment and your life to be about, regardless of the adversity that you're facing. And so that's really changed. That was a game changer for me, this whole concept of choice between stimulus and response. There's a blank piece of paper like you like, and that's what are you going to choose to have your response to become. So, for example, one of the stories in this book is about a man named Ed Rapp. Now, he'd be great to be on your show, but Ed was one of 3 presidents of Caterpillar, about to become named CEO. And at age 57, he was out running with his son, and he noticed his foot was dragging. Make a long story short, he was diagnosed with ALS. Mm-hmm. He immediately resigned at age 57, went home to Raleigh, North Carolina. That's a 5 to 7 year sentence, so to speak. He's in his 6.5 year now. He's doing fine, but every single morning, not only did he decide what he was going to do with this sentence, ALS, he's so far raised almost 15 million with an M, $1 million for ALS research. He'll never see that, because if they come up with a solution, he will have been long gone. But every single morning, he gets up and has a purpose conversation with somebody who was just diagnosed with ALS. Mm-hmm. He's given his number out to different people. He's never met those people. He'll never meet them again. That they're scared out of their wits about having this, and they want to talk to somebody who's got some protocols and practices to deal with it. And he says to me, that's the good life, Richard. And that's one of the stories in the book is about him. That's the good life. He says, I get to make a difference in one person's life every single day. And he said, that is, this is the cards I was dealt. And this is what I'm doing. Right. I'm dealing, and I want to help others make that choice as well. So the point is that we're all getting older, but if we're growing older, we have choices in spite of what the adversities might have been or will be along the way. So I don't know if that helps, but I think the whole concept of choice is what we're talking about here.
Yeah, it does. Well, let's go to Ed Rapp. So he's getting up in the morning with purpose, and you talk about that. What is that thing that gets you out of bed in the morning? It's so base, and I really adore the question and the premise. What gets you out of bed in the morning? Okay, so you mentioned Viktor Frankl, whose book I read long ago, and it just kept coming up to mind recently. I couldn't find it, so I bought a new copy, and I'm literally reading Man's Search for Meaning again. And he makes a statement. I don't know if I just got it out of your book or if I saw it somewhere else recently, but he says, when a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. Looking at where we are right now, I am, that one troubles me maybe most when we look at purpose, because I'm not going to say you're selling purpose, but you're advocating purpose. You long for people to have purpose. I do as well, because it's the thing that I am most grateful for, that I wake up in the morning, and no matter what, in my 50 years, I've never known a morning of waking up without some hopes, some expectations, some excitement. And I realize what an unprecedented privilege that is to have that. And I don't take it for granted. I take it less for granted every day. And yet in advocating it, I feel like today, Richard, the primary enemy is pleasure. It is that ability to feed shallowly, but to feed an immediate appetite. A screen with an order on Amazon that we received that day or later in the day. Endless entertainment, anything we want to eat at any time. We can have it delivered to our door for most people. And that is a hard sell. So we're selling this thing and saying, hey, it's better, but it's going to take you a lot more work. It's a deeper hole. It's a longer road. It's better. But it's going to come at the expense. You're going to have to give up this immediate appetite. I don't even know what my question is, other than
I think I agree with you in terms of your assessment of what's going on. And, purpose is a path and a practice or practices.
Okay.
So let me share a path and a practice for your listeners.
Okay.
And that is that the universal, well, first of all, when I was doing the PBS special and I was out in neuroscience labs across the country looking at purpose in the brain, purpose in health, purpose in well-being,
Okay.
a neurologist at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Majid Fatui, held up a pill and he said, Richard, you see this pill? This pill will reduce the effects of Alzheimer's. Even if you have it, you'll have a quality of life. It'll help with sleep apnea. It'll reduce macroscopic stroke by 41% and add 7 to 10 years to your life. You want to buy it? And I said, well, of course, but does it exist? And if so, what does it cost? And he smiled and he said, it's purpose. We now can measure purpose in the brain. The surprising science is that even those little telomeres on the end of every one of your chromosomes, if it's growing, you're going to be healthier and live longer. If it's shrinking, you're going to be less healthy and not live as long. We now know that purpose and telomeres have a direct effect on each other. It's not just one thing. There's other things too, like you're talking about diet and exercise and the choices you made earlier in life. But it's not just about the physical choices. It's also about the purpose choices. So here's my practice. The universal purpose is only 2 words. Worldwide, researched over almost 5 decades now, grow and give. That's it. If you get up in the morning, Kevin, tomorrow, which you do, I know, and you decide intentionally now, not accidentally, how am I going to grow and give today? There's 1,440 purpose moments in a day. Purpose moments are times when you can give, a hug to somebody, a kind word. As Viktor Frankl said in the concentration camp, what are the choices? Not many, but you can get up every day and give somebody else a slurp of soup, a kind word, a hug, hope for the future, have it yourself, And he said, in spite of everything, say yes to life. And so grow and give is a practice. So what I would suggest to your listeners is to take a Post-it out tonight or today and write grow and give and put it on your mirror. And in the morning tomorrow, when you get up, ask yourself, how am I going to grow and give today? It could be just 30 seconds in the doorway or an email or a hug or a kind word or something. And at the end of the day, ask yourself, how did I grow and give today? What was I curious about? What did I learn? You don't have to go to school. You don't have to read a book. You don't have to do anything like that. But how did I grow today and how did I give today? At the end of a week of growing and giving, there's what I found, there's a felt sense. This purpose thing, it actually feels good. It's not just a concept, not just a philosophical or spiritual or psychological concept. It's actually a felt sense that is probably going to help me live longer and with not only more fulfillment, but more health and well-being. So I say to myself, E.B. White, the American essayist, said this: I arise in the morning torn between a desire to save the world and a desire to savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day. Well, in all due respect to E.B. White, I think purpose makes it about saving, not literally saving, but saving means making a difference, saying yes to life to somebody, making that choice. And savoring means enjoying life, that pleasure principle. It's not either or, like all of a sudden I have to have a cause or be Mother Teresa or Nelson Mandela, but I have to somehow contribute to life if I'm going to be part of life.
That word savoring is one I've been chewing on a lot lately, Richard. And
yeah.
As I pursue my own personal peace and looking at savoring. So thanks for pulling that out. I want to talk about.
Does that grow and give make sense to you though? It's kind of like
it does. And I want to come into that because
everybody's getting older, but not everybody's growing older. And when you stop growing, as Bob Dylan says, you start dying. And so, the growing doesn't mean going back to school. It means staying relevant.
Right. Well, tell me about giving though, because that is one that at face value, I think we as a culture tend to look at it and think about, giving. You give to a charity, give to your church, give to the homeless, whatnot. And I would think that within that perspective, you'd say we're maybe missing it, or that's just the face of it.
Well, I think you make a good point, and it is a hard distinction. However, calling, we talked about jobs
Yeah.
and careers and calling, the way that we define it, my co-author and I define it, is the inner urge calling, the inner urge to give your gifts. So it's not, you don't have to give to a cause. That's a myth. Calling or purpose is a mindset. It's not having a cause. Cause is nice, but that's not it. It's about who you bring to 1,440 purpose moments today. You're there in Colorado or wherever you are. The choice is you make. It's about saying yes to life in that moment and contributing to others, as opposed to just being savoring. Can be very
Yeah.
self-absorbed.
Well, I appreciate that calling, the inner urge to give your gifts. It's not judging the gifts. It's
No,
not describing an altruistic definition based on any parameter necessarily.
right.
It's understanding your gifts and the opportunity to give them to benefit another human
No,
is a relevant calling and fulfills that
no,
aspect of giving
no.
within purpose.
And let me put a historical or a larger universe. Purpose is also universal. I've been leading walking safaris in Tanzania, East Africa for 35 years. 35 years leading walking safaris in the
Wow.
bush in Africa, and having the chance to sit around the fire with wise elders from tribes, one of whom is the Hadza, spelled Hadza. The
Okay.
Hadza are the last of the hunter-gatherers who are still living the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, who haven't been marginalized. And my little foundation that I helped create over there has helped them to maintain their sovereignty. But I'm sitting around the fire a few years ago with a hunter-gatherer elder in his 80s, which is very old for a hunter-gatherer because they live a tough life. They own nothing. They own zero other than a bow and arrow and maybe a honey axe and a knife. That's it. So I'm sitting around with him. His name is Kampala, and he's an elder in this Hadza tribe. And the Hadza have been around, Kevin, for 100,000 years. When you look at all the work that's been doing of anthropology and archaeology, et cetera, these are the original people, they call them. So I'm sitting there talking with one of the original people, and he's getting tired of my interview. And he says, "Richard, do you mind if I ask you a question?" And he speaks an ancient Click language. I can actually talk to him in Swahili, but he doesn't even. And so we step away, and he says, "Richard, do you know what the two most important days in your life are?" And I said, "Sure, birth and death." And he looked at me like I was from outer space. He said, "I thought you wrote these books about all this stuff." He's saying through a translator. And I said, "Well, Kampala, what are the two most important days in your life?" And he said, "Birth, because of infant mortality here in this country and in this bush. And the second most important day in the Hadza tribe are the day you determine why you were born, how you fit in." And now I'm translating for our conversation here, but he's basically how you share your gifts with our society.
Huh.
Because if it's all about you, we're going to die and you're going to die. We are a total sharing culture. We share everything. And that's the only way we survive for 100,000 years, through a total sharing culture. And so we help young people, and sometimes we don't even name them until we know what is special about them. What do they bring to the world here that others don't? Some are good hunters, some are some gatherers. They have different things they do well or not do well. So, I've studied this all over the world, and here I am sitting with a guy who's never been more than 50 kilometers from where we're sitting, who's has no formal education, but is a wise elder teaching me about purpose.
You I'm interested in, he's a hunter gatherer and he doesn't own anything. That stuck
Right.
with me there, Richard, because as we look at our culture, even in our affluence, so here in America, even in our affluence, we know that the vast majority of people are in essence hunting and gathering. They don't have enough to sustain the next 30 days without their income. They don't really own anything because even the car that they have and the house that they
Yeah.
have, the
They're
bank
being
owns.
evicted right now. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So we don't, so we're still, hunter gatherers. And when I look at motive, when I look at what drives us to, as you said, get out of bed in the morning, I was thinking about this as I was reading through your book and reading through your
Yeah.
material. And I thought, I spend time helping people figure out what drives them based on what they want to drive them, what they want to achieve. I haven't necessarily spent time looking and saying, okay, culturally, what seems to drive us? And as I did that, I'm thinking, is it again, culturally across the board, is it survival? Is that the number one
Sure.
reason we get out of bed, that we have to avoid the consequences of, you said, be evicted, not
Yeah.
having food?
Yeah. Well,
If
I
we,
had a yeah, I had a fortuitous encounter not only with Viktor Frankl, but a couple of years later with Abraham Maslow.
oh, wow.
Why? And so many people get Maslow's hierarchy wrong
Okay.
because at the end of his life, he died when he was 69, I think. And after he and Frankl had an uneasy relationship because Frankl thought self-actualization is self-absorption. And so that was the tip of his pyramid. And at the very end of his life, Maslow died, and he and Frankl came full circle to agree that the top of the Maslow hierarchy is self-transcendence, not self-actualization. It's about who you give and what you give to others. Maybe you need to be actualized to do that, but ultimately that's the top. And Maslow's wife wrote the book, The Farther Reaches of Human Nature, after he died. And so many people never read that book or never figured out that it's beyond self-actualization. What are we doing here? What's the point of the exercise? We're herd animals. We're part of community. And if we don't fit into that community and bring our gifts to that community, then what is the point?
Well, when we spend so much time in that survival, it seems like that's what most people come to. If that's the
Yeah.
midlife crisis of survival. I mean, as I thought about that, do we go from survival? What's after that? If you can go just beyond that, do you go after pleasure? Is that next? Just mere pleasure, again, feeding those shallow appetites?
I don't think so. But
Okay.
in our book, in this new book, we've got a whole chapter. The chapter that seems to be the most interest to or that people go to right away is, how do I stop living a default life?
Yeah.
A default life is one that you didn't actually pick you sort of did, but you're doing it, but you didn't consciously say, this is what I really care about. This is what I've learned, etc. You did it because that was society's norms, or you did that to make a living, or because you lived there and that was available. But at a certain point, usually, as I said, pushed by pain, like the pandemic, or pulled by possibilities, we look at, well, what are my choices now? I've only got 20 years left. Do I have to keep doing the same thing I've done? So rather than looking in the rearview mirror, what we're trying to do, the windshield is way bigger than the rearview mirror. We're
Right.
looking at what are the possibilities. And one of the chapters in the book is, so how do I start living the good life? And, my co-author, David Shapiro, and I wrote a bestseller called Repacking Your Bags, Lighten Your Load for the Good Life. And it sold over 1 million copies in 21 languages. And so we inserted it back into this book. And the good life is living in the place you love, with the people you love, doing the work that really matters to you, that fits you, like we're talking about, with purpose. Those 4 characteristics, and in addition to health and money, I always say there's 3 M's: uh, money, medicine, and meaning. And we need enough money, and we do, and we'll do what we need to do to survive to get that. The question at a certain point for some people is, how much is enough? And then medicine is about health. You can but people, and you've interviewed people, and them who have enough medicine, so to speak, and money, but are unhappy and unfulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
And people like the Hadza who don't have enough money in medicine, who are sharing culture, who are fulfilled. When you're around them, there's a certain sense of joy and humor that I don't want to romanticize their lives because it's a tough life, but it's way more alive. I'd rather be with them than an awful lot of people who are, wealthy CEOs who want to sit around the fire with me, and who are whining about their lives, And so anyway, these
Yeah.
are all things that, how do we say yes to life and not squander our lives?
You just said, in talking about the good life, first thing you listed was living in a place you love
Yeah,
and then being with people you love. And I actually skipped over it. I didn't mean to, because earlier when we were talking about gifts, and I just want to pull this thread back up because I don't
yeah,
want to miss it. I feel like it's so important. It's one that, again, with my adult kids, it came up to me,
yeah,
and I've never
hmm,
really experienced it so much. I've always been self-employed, so I've always created my own work environment.
yeah,
And yet, in looking at the culture and seeing so many people, and because I'm going to paraphrase what you said in essence, let's say you find your gifts, you find a calling, you find this thing. If you take that into an environment that is not what life giving,
yeah. Life giving. That's a
it,
good word.
it,
Affirming and life giving. Yep.
okay, that it's going to jeopardize, nullify, whatever, because that's what hit me is that we have a culture that's going after jobs primarily, and they're looking at
Right.
what's it pay, what's the title, what's the benefits, what's the hour, even what's the commute, maybe. And they don't ask, where am I going to sit? Who am I going to sit with?
Exactly.
Who are going to be the primary people that I'm in contact with, whether that's the janitor or a CEO or a boss or a manager or a coworker or whatnot. And then,
Yeah.
because what I've starkly seen, and I know you know this more than I do, is that in a quick time, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, every benefit that they first saw is nullified if
Right.
it's a toxic place or just not fitting to them.
That's right. It's
It,
exactly right. So gifts plus passions plus values. The V is really another word for that. For the V is voice. Do I
okay.
have a voice? Do am I relevant there? Do people listen to me? Is it a healthy place for me to? There's always latrine work in every job. There's stuff we don't want to
Right.
do that's part of the job, but hopefully it's a smaller percentage than the gifts and passions that you get to serve, you know, others. And so, at certain times in life, but we do need, as Chris Farrell writes, purpose and a paycheck. I mean, we need to figure out a way to make it work for ourselves, and that's not always easy. But post pandemic, I've been doing these interviews around the book, and the one of the interviews was with a very large real estate company that said 46% of the people who work at home don't want to live where they're living. They want to move.
Wow. Wow.
46%. And Zillow had 19.5 billion with a B hits during the pandemic. 19 billion people scouting online for places to live, so to speak. And it wasn't that they were, I don't know, it's you can't simplify it, but I'm sure many of them were looking at what are their possibilities. They weren't just looking at because they were going to get evicted or something else like terrible like that. So I think the as I said, this whole business uh, of choice, aging isn't optional, but growing is. And growing requires choice. It requires, and the old narrative, you'll remember, but your kids won't remember that the book Passages came out 47 years ago.
Hmm.
It was on the New York Times bestseller list for a long time. It was a new narrative about possibilities in midlife. Well, this book is a new narrative about the possibilities as we live 3 decades longer than we did. The average life expectancy in this country in early 1900s was age 47. Now the fastest growing cohort in the country is 85 and over.
Mhm.
Fastest growing innovation entrepreneurial cohort is women 60 and over. I mean, these are mind boggling transitions.
Okay, they are. So let's hit that one though, because that's one that in my involvement with advocacy of health and wellness, life
Yeah,
expectancy is a bit of a sore spot for me because we are. I mean, so we got the numbers, we know the stats. That's a fact. We are
right,
living
right,
longer as far as our heartbeat is continuing to go on longer. But to your point, I would say we have the ability to. We are statistically getting older, lasting longer,
right,
but not growing necessarily, which is in my heartburn. And what we're seeing in the culture
right.
is life expectancy is longer as far as the heart's still beating, but your life actually ended 20 years ago and you've been lingering for 20 years. And I tend to go back to purpose when there is
Yeah,
not
right,
purpose.
right.
And
Yep,
we've accepted that decline and deterioration.
yep.
And I would say, oh, that's why I love you taking purpose, not just from a motivation, inspiration thing, but actual to you took it to a biomarker of telomeres.
Yeah.
And folks have
I
heard,
taught
yeah, go ahead.
I taught with Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize for the telomere effect.
Okay.
And I mean, her science is that purpose is fundamental to telomere growth. It's not the only thing. It's not like I can't claim that that's it. But it's part of it. And without it, telomeres don't survive and thrive like they could. I uh, teach. I mean, I work with the American Academy of Neurology, the Mayo Clinic, with healthcare organizations around the country, and with Integrative. And I'm a senior fellow in the Academic Health Center at the University of Minnesota,
Mm,
as well as a senior fellow at Notre Dame. And what I know from those experiences is that purpose is fundamental to integrative health. When you
yes.
look at the integrative health models, you do need sleep, you do need exercise, you do need nutrition, you do need all of these other mindfulness and all these other things. But without what's the point of the exercise? Why do all that? There's the purpose is the why. And so the there's a place, the wealthiest woman in the world is Alice Walton in Bentonville, Arkansas. She's a
Okay.
billionaire, from Walmart. She's creating something called the Whole Health Institute and the Whole Health Medical School from scratch. But I'm just using that as an
Wow.
example where I'm going to be a purpose fellow down there because purpose is central to whole health. And she's funding it because she wants to bring this kind of message like we're talking about here to the world of people who can't afford it or don't know about it or don't have the education to get it or whatever. And so what I'm finding is and we could go off on the whole well-being thing in way big detail because purpose is really fundamental to integrative health. And when I did the PBS special, last point here, Kevin, on that is that they said you need to rewrite your classic book. My classic seminal book is The Power of Purpose. And so for the PBS special, I came out with a third edition. The last chapter in the book, which they fundamentally funded me to go out and research, is can science explain purpose? And the answer is yes. Science can now explain it. It's every new idea goes through stages like ridicule, opposition, self-evident. Well, purpose is now self-evident, even at places like the Mayo Clinic that are all about evidence-based medicine.
Yep. Yep. Well, in my world is very aligned with integrative health and it's functional medicine.
Yeah,
And when we
yeah,
look,
that's another
yeah,
word for yeah,
yeah, absolutely. When we look at cognitive decline and
right,
the neurology of that, and we look at the tactics that we can take, and even health, obviously, eat well, like you said, eat well, sleep well, have great relationships in your
right.
life that we don't put in there. Hey, if you want to, I've never seen this. If you want a primary ingredient to avoid dementia, have purpose.
Yeah,
Nobody's, well, I was gonna say nobody's preaching that. I guess you're preaching that.
yeah. No, I am, and I'm writing about it, and but it's being preached about. It won't be long before your doctor is going to say Kevin, you need a reason to get up in the morning in addition to all the other things you're doing. That's the missing piece here. Potentially. I mean, it depends, but it's coming to that. And it's not that far off right now. When you
Well,
look at the interest in resilience,
yep.
purpose and resilience, purpose is fundamental to the research on resilience. And so, there's different words for what we're talking about, but I think what we're talking about is a mindset here
Yeah.
and a choice and about how we go about things.
It is. I am excited about what you're doing and what you're talking about even right here, because to me, it supersedes the gravity that we would say we give to mindset and gets
Yeah.
into literal, well, call it science, call it medicine, whatnot, because
Yeah.
what I'm looking at, again, back to telomeres, as you're talking about, well, you talked about this, Richard, you talked about purpose being age agnostic. And that's another aspect, another area I appreciate is I play a lot with ageism. The fact that I am 50.
Yeah.
And when you get into literal medical stuff, let's talk insurance.
Yeah.
I am going to be charged by my insurance company, life insurance, health insurance, whatever, based upon my age. Even if, let's go back to the biomarkers, the telomeres you're talking about, even if my test comes back and says, oh, you have the telomeres of a 35-year-old,
Right.
You have the carotid artery scan of a 35-year-old, which I do.
Right. Yeah.
I don't get benefit from that, which I would say is ageism. I don't get a benefit.
Right.
They're still going to say, well, you're 50. I can, and I know this can get into muddy waters. I can debate my sexuality and gender and whatnot, but age is age. And so when you're talking about purpose and how it feeds into health and wellness, if I'm an insurance adjuster or actuary,
right, you don't pay attention to that. No,
I don't. And yet here it is. And I'm saying you're a better, you, Richard, how old are you, Richard?
77.
77. You're a better health risk at 77. You should get the benefit financially of insurance as a 55.
My doctor says, I'm not trying to be younger. I just want to be me full out. And so, and one of the things we haven't talked about that is related to this very directly is that isolation is fatal. There's a loneliness epidemic right now that is costing us billions and costing people their lives in certain ways. And there's many studies that say, particularly with males, but it's not just males. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but that they don't have one person they can talk to and transparently about their life. And I hope that your program is speaking to those people and waking them up to say, look, isolation is fatal. It's not a good idea. And it's not that you have to be blabbing about your life to everybody, but you have to have at least one committed listener on your sounding board, somebody who gets you and gets the fact that you're scared or you're this or you're whatever you are. And so that's another part of this that really has a very toxic effect. And to your point with your younger, it's not just older people. You could be in the workforce and be in a work environment and not have one person who really gets you. And that's going to sink you. You're not going to do your best work and you're probably going to leave.
Well, speak to that more then, because this is something, yes, Richard, we speak to that. We did a show, I did a show in the past, I want to say 60, 90 days where I ran a survey. I do this often. I'll post a question on Facebook, and I posted one asking something in the vicinity of who do you have in your life that lifts you up, encourages you, something of that nature. And where I had a post the day before where I asked just a random survey question, had 70, 100 responses, something like this. I think in the first 24 hours, just got 2. It was a blank.
Wow. You mean they didn't have anybody, or they didn't respond?
Well, both. It's one and the same on a Facebook survey. It's people don't respond to what they don't have something to offer to. And we talked about that, and people came back later and verified that what you just said, that the average person doesn't have one person to actually share life with. But I want you to tell us more, because I know that we talk about this. I talk about it here on the show. I want to feel like it's been said, but either it's not being said or it's not being understood, that it flies in the face of the feeling that we are uber connected. and yet we don't have anybody to share anything with. We have a Facebook page with 1,000 friends or 5,000 or whatever. Or we have Twitter, we have whatever, we have an audience even. And Richard, you know, behind me, just like you, I've got my,
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
stack of books and the people that I have
Yeah.
there. And I would say by far and large, most of the people I have on the show are people that do understand this. They do have good relationships, but I know, because I know there are some that have big audiences even, and
Yeah.
yet they are isolated and alone at the top, and they don't have that person,
Yeah.
that one person, as you
Yeah.
said.
And for some people, it could be the empty nest, or it could be the retirement from what they did, that all of a sudden that gave them a reason to get up in the morning. That gave them a time structure, a relationship structure in certain ways, and that's gone.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm considered a pioneer in the coaching movement, written a lot for other people's coaching books, et cetera, and done coaching for many, many years. I would not coach somebody if you said to me, Kevin, Richard, will you coach me? I would say, who's on your sounding board? If you don't have a sounding board, I won't coach you, because that's how important I think it is that you have somebody other than a professional like me to talk to. And on a sounding board, there's at least 4 people. And number 1 is a committed listener. Who's your committed listener? Who's that person, whether it's a success or a failure or a good day or bad day, gets you, and you can talk to them full stop without holding back. Secondly, who's your wise elder? Who's the person, maybe they're even deceased, but you say, well, what would they be asking me? What would they think about this? And I think about people like Viktor Frankl. For me, I think, well, what would Frankl say to this?
Right.
But hopefully it's somebody my wise elder just died at 93. And so I'm kind of not at a loss per se, but kind of looking at that. And then the third is, who's your wise younger? Who's the person who's younger than you that maybe asks you the good questions, and you can talk with, not just about technology or about their life, but I like the term Chip Connolly uses, mentern, being a mentor and an intern. So with the wise younger, you can be a mentor, but also an intern, a learner from them, kind of a mentor. And then the fourth one is, who's your purpose partner? Who's the one who holds your feet to the fire? You say you want to do this, and they check in with you, whatever you agree to say, how are you doing, Kevin? You said you wanted to write a book. What kind of writing did you do this week? So it's kind of that. So those are, and the other thing is kind of people always smile, but often on people's sounding board is a pet. A dog or a cat that they can talk to, and that loves them, and they knows everything about them in certain ways. And it's just an example, though, how good that feels to have somebody or something in your life like that.
Okay, you know what? That's a great entry into a question I was going to ask you as well. I'm not necessarily going to go through your whole manifesto, but I really like it. I really appreciated that when, I don't know if it was you, I think it was your team, gave me all your intake stuff. They gave me all this stuff, but they said, and he also has this manifesto that's 1 page, which you had me at 1 page. So I went and looked at that. And number 1, let me read it here. You have source. Everything that exists has a purpose. We were born for a reason. A loving creator created us and all beings to fulfill specific purposes in a mysterious world. Our purpose in life might be revealed by our creator, ... but it might not. Okay. What brought me to that right now, though, is you saying a sounding board. And I can hear people saying, hey, on my sounding board, I've got the Lord, I've got God, in whatever way, shape they form that. I'm going to ask you to give us some input on that, because as much of a faith-based person I am, and as an admitted, I put my faith in God.
As do I.
I'm going to question, though, when you say a sounding board, I am also a great believer in that God likes to work through flesh and bone. Well, talk to us about that, because my fear is people saying, oh, I've got the Lord, that's my sounding board. my experience is that he likes to work through people. And if that's your only spot and you don't have flesh and blood, you're in jeopardy.
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, well, I agree that isolation is fatal. I mean, you're here now,
Yeah.
so don't go it alone
Yeah.
in certain ways. Uh, uh, in that last chapter of the Power of Purpose book, Can Science Explain Purpose? I went back to world religions. About a decade ago, Kevin, I actually took a year off and went into the seminary for a year.
Oh,
And I wasn't sure exactly what was calling me at that point, other than I wanted to learn about purpose and world religions. And what I found was I didn't necessarily want to be ordained and come back to, be in a faith-based organization per se. I had a secular organization that was huge, like you do, that I could, if I paid attention, make a difference in people's lives, perhaps more than if I did it another way.
yeah.
But I found that almost every world religion and faith has purpose in it in one fashion or another. They use different language, they use different ways of talking about it, but it's all about making a difference in the lives of others. Pure and simple. And so that's the difference in this book. It's not a faith-based book in terms of only Christians will read it, or only Muslims will read it, or only Jews will read
Right.
it, et cetera. But purpose is a verb. And I talk about the big P purpose and the small p purpose. Big P purpose is kind of cause. The Lord's using me for a reason, and this is the cause. Little p purpose, though, is what are your practices? What do you do on a day-to-day basis? I know a lot of people who are very devout, faith-based people who don't have practices. When I'm with it, I don't get it. I don't feel it. I don't get a sense that they're making that kind of contribution that they talk about. So purpose has there's big P purpose and there's little p purpose. And little p purpose is intentional, small p is the day-to-day choices you make to live your faith, to live your values in those purpose moments. And I also differentiate purpose from goals.
Okay.
That's another thing that confuses people. But goals are perhaps immediate and can be self-absorbed. Purpose is always long-term and beyond yourself.
The I've got a piece on that I want to ask, but I don't want to leave what I just read there
The
because it's
manifesto, yeah.
the manifesto. Well, that piece in the
Four,
manifesto.
four, 4 decades on one page, 10 points. That has gone viral around the world because why it's not, you might not agree with anything on there, Kevin, whether you do or not. I see so many people who talk about purpose. And I said, well, what's your stand? What is it that you believe about it? Where did it come from?
Uh-huh.
So I wrote down, this is where it came from, in my humble estimation. And this is what it's about. And this is how you practice it. Now, if you don't agree with that, then what is your manifesto?
Yeah. I appreciate that. That line in the first and number one, though, that our purpose in life might be revealed by our creator, ... but it might not. That stopped me in my tracks. And I just wanted to hear more. Tell me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, as I said, it's, you can use your biblical or your faith to fill it in for yourself. But I think that it's a mystery. Like Dick Bowles, who's an Episcopal priest, said, we have amnesia. We have to figure it out.
Okay. Right. Well, and that makes me think too of, God using people in our lives to help us
exactly
figure that out. Another, coming off of what you just said a minute ago, though, it's actually it's a culmination of number 2 and number 4. So you've got what I think 10 points on there. And you said purposeful living is not just a luxury for the affluent. It's for everyone, regardless of socioeconomic status. But I want to pull out that luxury because I do feel like a lot of the populace has a tendency to discount some of the discourse on purpose and calling as, that's great after if you're not in survival mode like I am, and you're saying, no, it's not a luxury, one.
Right.
And then down to number 4, and you talk about compassion is the soul of purpose. you make a statement that the opposite of purpose is actually narcissism, excessive interest in oneself. So one, you're saying it's not a luxury, and I'm going to paraphrase and say it's a necessity. And
Yeah.
then two, it's not self focus. Well, and you even talked before about self actualization. It's really more in regards to self transcendence, because it is other focus, back to the giving. And that the opposite of purpose, that's a big statement, is narcissism, excessive interest in oneself. Expand on that.
Yeah. Well, there's three stages of purpose, to simplify it in a quick manner. The first stage is me. I have to figure out me, my
Okay.
gifts, so how I fit into the world. And so that's usually when we're younger, but there's plenty of people who are older who are still working on me in a self-absorbed type way. Second, it's about we. So at some point, hopefully younger, like your 20 somethings, will figure out it's really not just about me, it's about us.
Yeah.
And it's about we, meaning that it's, you know, and oftentimes that's my family, my tribe, my community. You see a lot of that going on in politics today, tribalism, things like that, which is a stuck point when it comes to purpose. But when you look at world religions and you look at healthy well-being, etc., it starts with me, goes to we, and then it's about all of us. And the great saints and sages and teachers that you've had, like the Zig Ziglars, talk about, it's about all of us. It's about who we bring to life, to the world, not just my people in my church or my community or my whatever. And so can we grow and can we evolve? You know, we go through two big growth points, two big shifts. One is from adolescence to adulthood. But the second big shift is from adulthood to elderhood. And when you make a shift from adulthood to elderhood, it's not just about from midlife to older life, it's about wisdom.
Yeah.
And wisdom is about seeing the big picture. And most great faiths are about wisdom. They see a much larger lens than just the narrow tribal lens that you and I have been referring to in certain ways.
Richard, is it fair to take what you just shared with us, purpose? So number one, figuring out me. So there is some self-focus there. Number two, though, is it's growing, maturing,
Yeah,
as you mentioned earlier, to no, it's about we.
yeah,
That's the next step, which I'm going to put in there. That's your, it could be your religion, your political status, your state status, if you're a proud whoever in, or native,
yeah,
national,
yeah,
whatever it may be. We're in the Olympics right now, so I
yeah,
feel
right.
guilty sometimes saying, "Okay, how's the American doing?" When that's my tribe,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah,
Third, we gravitate to it's all of us. That's the bigger picture. Is it
right.
fair though to say that, and I'm saying this because I poke against somewhat about, well, gosh, this is big discussion, kind of the
Yeah,
dying to self aspect that we get in I'm going to say in some of the religiosity that I grew up with. That I get the concept, but dying to self, it's impossible. I will never not be self-interested. So that to say,
yeah.
is it fair to say from 1 to 2 to 3, it's all of us. And that is the best way for me to be fulfilled, which is my self-interest.
Well, that's the grow and give.
Okay.
If you're not growing, you don't have somebody or something to give.
Yeah.
And so the growing is really code for evolving personally and savoring and things. So you feel like you have something to offer. If you're not growing, you're not becoming wiser. And I know one of my colleagues has on his answering machine. I don't think I said this earlier. It says, at the sound of the tone, please leave your answer to life's two eternal questions. Who are you and what do you want?
that's
Well, we
that's
ask the
great.
who are you and what do you want question throughout
Yeah.
life. I mean, it's just part of being an alive, curious uh, human being in certain ways. So one of the people in the book who I don't know if you had Parker Palmer on before. Do you
No,
know
but it rings a bell.
Well, he's got a huge following. His last book was on the brink of everything, grace, gravitas, and getting older. He's got this huge, and he's got a huge following of across the country. And but he said in the story that I wrote in the book, in my interview with him, he said he's 82 or 3 now, and he stopped doing, I would call it, job and career. But he said to me, he said, Richard, I can't imagine living life without a vocation.
Okay.
And what he's talking about is a calling, a reason to get up and contribute to life in certain ways. And his chapter in the book is the chapter title in which his story exists is "How Will My Music Play On?" Mm. And at certain points in life, we start to look at, it could be the death of our parents, it could be our own illness, it could be a lot of different things. At my age, at 77, I'm doing memorial services for people, doing eulogies and things. And the very last, his chapter is called "How Will My Music Play On?" And the very last chapter, the opening of this book, starts with the long conversation that my co-author and I are having. But at the end, it's called the ultimate conversation. What do you think happens when you die? How would you like to die? And the 3 questions, and what gifts do you want to leave the world before you die? Not just your legacy and your money and your whatever, but what are the gifts you want to leave before you die? And I'll tell you, when people start to dig into that, rather than having it be moribund or fearful or anything, it actually enlivens people to say, I need to pay more attention to this preciousness of my life now and really appreciate and bring more of my, I'll call it vocation, but my calling to life now, not just look at a legacy at the end of life. I think it was David Brooks who said that you have eulogy virtues and you have resume virtues. And many people today are spending a lot of time on their resume virtues, building up that, which you were talking about, their incomes and their personal but when you go to a memorial service, that's really short. What really happens is, who was this person? How do they influence my life? What was the value of their life? All of that is the kind of thing that's about purpose.
Well, and Richard, with that, I mean, with my focus on drive, what drives us, survival, we got survival there. We got the pleasures of life. We've got our status and our luxuries and whatnot. And yet when I look at it, and maybe it's, again, the privilege that I have of waking up with it, is especially with family and kids, I care about that ending result, that legacy. And that helps me, I think, have a drive that supersedes the fluctuations of life, the urgency of today. You got to address it. But right. I'm again, that's why you're on the show. That's why I was interested in this, whether you're on the older half of life or the younger half of life, which I guess technically I've just entered into the older half of life with excitement. My dad, I had on a show recently. He's just about your age, maybe just a little bit younger, and he's excitedly planning out the next 20 years of his life. And, his separation, the gap between him and his peers from a health standpoint, from a happiness standpoint, from a fulfillment standpoint is drastically widening at a rapid pace. And it's due to just what you're talking about here. I'm grateful to connect with you, Richard. I'm grateful for the work that you're doing. I'm eager to stay connected with you, because this aspect of purpose.
Me too. This has been a very fascinating interview for me. I just love your questions, but your insights into these questions as well. It feels more like a conversation than an interview. It's a conversation with a friend I'd like to have more of a conversation with. So,
Thank you. This will be a beautiful, beautiful episode. You know what? We'll edit into the ending there, and I'll do an outro on that. I do have a couple questions for you, if you've got just a moment.
Sure. I'm good.
let me scroll down here. Yeah, if you have any, now that we have connected, if you have anyone, you mentioned a couple names that you think would be a great fit for me and for these shows. My best, often my best guests come from referrals from other guests.
Yeah.
So I'd be honored if there's anyone.
Well, it depends on what kind of content you want, but I've had the privilege of having fortuitous encounters with a lot of people who have become colleagues and friends over time, and so I've been very fortunate in that way. People said, "Oh my God, how do you know all these people?" I said, "Well, I've been around in this space for a long time, and you meet them over time." And so there's a lot of people we could talk about. Tom Colditz is another one. I don't know if you've heard of Brigadier General Tom Colditz. I coached him when he was the head of leadership of the U.S. Military Academy.
Okay.
And he was in the military for 30 years. And to get that appointment, you have to be appointed by the President of the United States to be head of leadership at West Point. He left there, and he now is at Rice University, where John Doerr gave a downstroke of $50 million to create a breakthrough program on leadership for people in college, and purposeful driven leadership, not leadership in the way we think about it. And so he just came out with a book called Leadership Reckoning, showing how most colleges and universities across the country, mostly domestic and Canada, claim that they teach leadership, but they have no evidence whatsoever that what they do works, or how they, what's behind it. Colditz is one of the most interesting, and his whole premise is why you lead determines how well you lead, and including leading your lives. But he's a marvelous interview, and
I'd be honored. I'd be honored.
Colin Powell, Barack Obama, a host of others, all, when John Doerr was a Silicon Valley billionaire, said, "Who should I pick to head this thing at Rice?" They all said the same person. They all went like, "Oh, Colditz, it has to be Colditz," because he was retiring from West Point in the military. I've been his coach for years, and so he's very public about that. I don't talk about who I coach, but he's one who does talk about it.
How do you spell his last name?
Kolditz.
Okay.
And it's the Doerr, Doerr Leadership Institute at Rice University. You'll find it to be fascinating.
I'll go look into it and look into the new book as well. And I think I've got your email, so I'll follow up.
Yeah, it's just Richard Leider at mac.com. Mine is.
Okay. And then also the lady, I didn't get her name down, connected with, Walmart, Purpose,
her name is
Whole Health Institute.
Her name is Lori Knutson, Lori Knutson. She's the chief COO, Chief Operating Officer of the Whole Health Institute. It's just launching, so you'd be on the front edge of this. But Alice Walton of Walmart, the Walton.
Yeah.
And so Lori moves from Duke University and other prestigious medical institutions to Bentonville, Arkansas. So, and she said, "I want you to come down and do Purpose with us." And I said, Lori, why are you moving to Bentonville? Because I've got all these prejudices about, she said, "Do you know that to work with Walmart, if you're going to be a major vendor, you have to have an office here with executives in it? Therefore, we have 3 airports here. We have an executive airport for their jets, we have a commercial airport, and we have Walmart's airport. And as a result of all the money here, we have more good restaurants, more good schools, housing is," and she said, "Bentonville's like this postage stamp of progression in a place that's not so progressive."
Interesting.
And so she's there, and they're able to attract the best and the brightest in this whole well-being space, because she said, between you and me, she said, for the first time, I haven't had to dial for dollars. It's all underwritten by one person with one check, which I can't imagine what that's like. Hopefully, and apparently she's very, very evolved in allowing people to really be their best and not trying to control things.
Okay. Well, I'll look into
I,
that as well and may
yeah.
follow up with you for a connection there. And yeah, anything you have in mind. I mean, you're talking, Richard. I mean, this is my area of interest. I have a book coming out with McGraw-Hill in February is when it's supposed to come out, called What Drives You. And it is focused on the point of it is leading with drive. So it'll be a lot, everybody wants to be driven. So that's the calling
Yeah.
card
Yeah.
there, but ultimately it's to back them up into purpose
Yeah.
and calling,
Yeah.
which to me necessitates that they know what they value. And that's
Yeah.
my end
Right.
game, is
Exactly.
people knowing what they value.
And Dan Pink, have you had Dan Pink on? He wrote Drive and he
Yes,
wrote
yes,
all
yes.
these
I
other
had
books.
him
Yeah.
on for,
Yeah.
I can't remember which book I had him
Yeah.
on. It's been a
He's a
long
long,
time.
I know a lot of these people very personally.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
the other one that I thought would be really interesting for you, if you have one more second here, and
Yes, yes, yes.
that is one of the bestseller books I wrote was called Life Reimagined.
Yeah.
And my co-author was Alan Weber. Now, Alan was the editor-in-chief of the Harvard Business Review, and he left there to found Fast Company magazine. And he sold, and that's where we met. He did a story about me in one of the original issues of Fast Company, and that's how we got connected. He sold Fast Company after 12 years for the largest price of any business magazine in the history of America. And he moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico with his wife, who's an artist and an architect who wanted to live in a more artistic and wanted to move there.
Yeah.
He's now running for his second term as the mayor of Santa Fe.
Oh, really?
He decided in the midst of us writing Life Reimagined that he would reimagine his own life, and he ended up running. He way back when he'd been in politics as a chief of staff for somebody in Washington, and so anyway, here's a guy who's a mayor of Santa Fe who's been through Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, wrote a bestseller with me, is now changing the game politically. That would be to talk about drive. That would be a very interesting story that would attract. He's in his early 70s, but he's so full of passion and he's so smart and charming. He's to be one of your better interviews ever.
Thank you. Okay. I'll make a list here and follow up with you
okay.
with your email.
All right.
And then we'll also let you know when we publish this and everything.
Yeah.
Just a gift. Thank you so much, Richard.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I was really looking forward to this, and the publisher has had more interest in this book than any book they've done in 30 years in terms of media interviews. And part of it's aging, and part of it's post-pandemic, and part of it's the economy, a variety of things. And part of it is I've got a good platform of readers that might want to see what else I'm writing, but mostly it's about what's going on in society that you're on top of there. I think you're right. You're right on. So let me know if there's any way I can be helpful to support the effort. And I really appreciate your fine interview style. So thanks.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. It's a gift, and I'll be in your email box.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Blessings to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.